to talk about, continue our discussion of Bootstrap, focusing on the client side scripting aspect of it. I mentioned last week, I think I misspoke about not being sure if Bootstrap had client side component. I think we discovered last week that it does. Yes, I am recording. Thank you. Bootstrap does have a client side component to it, and it allows you to do things in an easier way. There's another tool that does similarly, and that is jQuery. And you have an assignment coming up with Bootstrap using the client-side scripting aspect of Bootstrap. And we won't have a jQuery assignment, I don't think, anyhow. I have to decide for sure, but I don't think we will have a jQuery assignment. Excuse me, but I do want to at least introduce you to jQuery in case you see it. One of the reasons I cover sometimes a couple different alternative ways of doing things is because you never know on any given project what mix of tools you'll have. So you might be working on a site that uses jQuery for things, or you might be working on one that uses Bootstrap, or maybe even some combination of the two. So I think it's always good to cover a range of functionality. So one thing I did correct last time is I believe I posted to the wrong version of the Bootstrap tutorial. Not that it would be much different, but just to be accurate, I posted, I changed the links in week 6, and I pointed in this week to the week 5 Bootstrap tutorial. And we could look at any number of things here that go beyond simply the CSS aspect of Bootstrap. Something that you see like this, for example, Jumbotron. You know, that's all CSS. There's no real behavior here, right? In other words, we define. Click on the wrong thing, I think. Yeah, that really is just CSS coding. There's no behavior on it. Nothing happens if you click on it. And so that's all entirely CSS stuff. If we look at some of the other behaviors, though, some of the other functionality of Bootstrap, we can see other sorts of things that involve more than just CSS, but also involve behavior. For example, oops. Just saw it a minute ago. I can't see it now. So, carousel is a slideshow that cycles through elements. So, for example, we could have a series of photographs cycle through. Now, I'm confident that any one of you could write this in JavaScript. All right. Just like any one of you could probably plant some wheat in your backyard, grow the wheat, and take the wheat and grind it into flour, and I don't know, get some yeast from somewhere and make your own bread from scratch, right? But we don't necessarily do that. Why? Because we have bigger fish to fry, so to speak. We have more important things to take care of than this sort of low-level functionality. This is a very standard kind of component. All right, many websites are going to have this slideshow built as part of it. So therefore, Bootstrap gives you a way to do that easily. And as you can see, this is not just dealing with appearance, this is dealing with behavior as well. So here's an example of how to do that. All right. And it's all done by identifying classes, by associating the different things on the page with different classes. So for example, these represent, let's run it and show, and then we could experiment with it and see what it is. There's our carousel example. What do you think these are? Well, let's get rid of them and see what we lose. Those represent those dots on the bottom, which show you our position. So how do we do that? We give them a class. We give the div that contains them a class of carousel indicators. And we give these other data values for the rest of it. Again, this is a mix of, this is an old, oh no, this isn't an old example. This is with Bootstrap 5.3.2, which also includes JavaScript as well as CSS. These are the different images in there. Carousel inner. Carousel item indicates it's something that's going to be part of the slideshow or part of the carousel. Active means it's going to be the one that displays. So in other words, when we run this the first time, this image displays. Notice we give a width of 100%. And what that does is that makes the width match the size of the container. So whatever the width of this container is, that is the width of the image. You can jump directly to it by clicking that, back and forth. Then we have these, the left and right control icons, and those are the little arrows that appears. Don't believe me? Let's get rid of it. Actually, we lose both of them. Slideshow still works, but we have no way of controlling it manually to move ahead, forward, or backwards, or whatever. So if you wanted to put a carousel on one of your web pages, this would be a good, quick and dirty. I don't know, it's not even that quick and dirty. It's quick, but it's not particularly dirty way to do it. And as you can see, this is very maintainable. Because if we want to add another picture to this, let's add LC's logo to the carousel. All we would need to do is, boom, copy this. Copy the link. URL, rather, not the link. and run that. And we'll have to add this too. But there you see it got added to the slideshow. As you notice, in this case, it helps if all the images are of the same dimensions, at least the same aspect ratio, because this one image being of a different size kind of doesn't really work that well. But I mean, it works, it just, you know, visually it doesn't seem to be correct. It's really great anytime in programming when you have a framework. All right. A framework is something that you can build upon. All right. And you can put your own spin on it. You can customize it and so on. Why is it good? It's good in two respects. All right. First of all, it's easier to initially develop. All right. I would bet that if I gave this assignment for you to code only using JavaScript, as I said before, you probably all could do this. But look how slick this is. Even has a nice little animation where the pictures slide in instead of just appearing. All right. To do it this good, to do it in a way that has been thoroughly tested, and besides that, it's very easily maintainable. So it saves you time all the way around. All right. Saves time, produces code that, nothing personal, I would say that's about me as well. If I were to write an image carousel like this, I wouldn't be as confident in my code as I would be for this, because this has been field tested and assured that, you know, with some level of confidence that it is working correctly. Plus, it's easy to maintain. All right. If you take more than a couple classes with me, you'll hear me constantly harping on maintainability. Maintainability is one of the main reasons we do anything in programming. If I were to ask you, like, why do we indent our code? All right, in an HTML file. Do we have to indent our code? No. We could literally write an HTML file that was one line with 10,000 characters in it. But guess what? That's going to be very hard for us to go in and change if we need to. And the corollary of this is, yes, you will need to go back in and change it. All right. Any code that you write is really and extremely likely that you will have to go in at some point and make changes to it. That way, you can make the changes quickly and easily. We just saw how easy it would be to add one item to this list, or take away an item, or whatever. And again, this is done in Bootstrap. And without getting into the details of how Bootstrap does its thing, it uses these class and assigns certain behaviors, assigns certain little snippets of JavaScript to these things based on the selectors. All right, I think I beat this one to death, but it is a good example to go over. Let's look for something else. Pagination. This isn't a particularly good example, but if you had for example, a document that had multiple pages. I guess this would be useful if you were flipping between different links and you had a different URL. If you had an href of page 1, page 2, page 3. Like, for example, any of you have filled in the FAFSA report. You know, it's like about 1,000 pages long to fill in. And, you know, it's very useful to be able to bounce between pages of it. So something like that, a very large form that has many pages, you would put the link right here with the href, and you'd put this on the bottom of each of the pages, and then you could go and scroll between the different pages very easily. You wouldn't have to do page 1, page 2. If you wanted to, you could say personal info. Reference info. Tax info. Can't type. You could go to the different pages that way. So that's a cool way of doing pagination. See, progress bar. This isn't particularly useful. It doesn't seem like there's any JavaScript associated. You would have to update you have to write your own JavaScript to update the percentages. Let's look at cards. Oh, a card in Bootstrap has a bordered box with some padding. Okay, that doesn't really have behavior associated with it. I'm looking for specifically things that have behavior associated with it. Toast. Toast is a little message that pops up to give some information. It's like an alert box, but it only shows for a couple of seconds. Or clicks on a button and so on. In this example, the show class will always show the toast by default. You can close it by clicking on the close form. There you go. Okay, now the one that your assignment's going to deal with, and that is the collapse. Oh, this is cool. It updates the link depending on where you are on the page. And it tells you all the data stuff. And again, there's more than just a class to this. There's also the data attributes that you have that you can use. Tooltip. Put your mouse over it. It will give you a little bit of a tip about what to say. I'm just trying to cover all the ones that have have behavior associated with them as opposed to just pure CSS, because those are the ones that are actually the scripting aspect of Bootstrap. All right, now the one that we're going to get into, collapse. Click on the button to toggle between showing and hiding content. Remember, we did this early on in the game, right? And we wrote our JavaScript to do this. And it wasn't particularly hard to do. But simply by putting these classes and these data attributes on these elements, we can do that without ourselves having to write any JavaScript. And it does it, I would argue, slightly better because look, it smoothly scrolls those pieces of content in. Right, how is this different? I don't think it is. Oh, they have the same example twice. This starts out with it visible, and then you can press the button and show it. So just a way to show and hide stuff. Now, for your next assignment, you're asked to do an accordion control. And what is an accordion control? Accordion control is like this. It's very similar to tabs. Remember, with tabs, you have sections of content on your page and links at the top. And when you click on the link, it hides everything and shows a selected tab. So tabs are like this. You have this section of code, and you have some links on the top of the page. And when you click on a link, it shows that section and hides all the rest. An accordion control is like that, except being a header and this being the content. You have the header and the content, and then you have a second header, third header, and a fourth header. We'll actually see a code example of this in a couple minutes. So if I click this header, this content area appears and all the rest of them disappear. All the rest of them will collapse. If I click on this one, this will disappear and the content associated with this will appear. So it's similar to a tab in that at one point in time, you're only seeing one content area. The difference between a tab and an accordion control is just physically how the things are laid out on the screen. Instead of having the links on the top and what content area here, the links are in a list, vertical list, and the content displays right underneath the header. So let's look at an example of that. I have a video for you to watch. Using accordions in Bootstrap.
So then,
5.
accordions are a new component in Bootstrap 5, and they're essentially a way to...
By going it over, but I will show you page a little bit. Here's an example of accordion control. We have header, header, header. When we click on a header, it'll toggle it. All right, that's the one part I missed. If I click on a different header, it hides the first header and shows the second header. So shows second content area and third one. The one thing I missed in my explanation is if you click on the same one a second time, it will hide it. So let's go and let's take this code and let's make a web page out of it. Put our doc type in. HTML tag. By the way, if you're not already, I would suggest downloading and using Visual Studio Code. It's just a nice editor that does things like IntelliSense. If you add in a start tag, it will automatically add in the ending tag. Let's see if you're paying attention. Paste this right here. This going to work? And the correct answer is, of course, it's not going to work. Why not? Well, because I didn't put in the Bootstrap code. I didn't define the Bootstrap JavaScript and CSS, so it's not going to work. So let's go and let's put that in. This meta tag for viewport is good to help displaying on mobile devices. So now I put the Bootstrap stuff in, both the CSS and the JavaScript. And now it should work. Almost feels like cheating, right? Almost makes you wonder why we bother studying JavaScript when there's all these wonderful tools that do things for us very quickly and easily. Well, first of all, it's always good to know sort of on a nuts and bolts level what's going on. But there are many things that, how do I want to say, are unique to our particular project. like an accordion control. I think you could see how many different projects could benefit from having an accordion control. It's just sort of a standard, what would you say, standard little widget that we might want on any number of different web pages. So they made making it easy. Now that doesn't mean that Bootstrap's going to have code in there for everything that you want to do in JavaScript. But a lot of the things that are very common that you might want to do, it has stuff in there for it. So we saw one example, the photo gallery. We have another example here, the accordion control. And we can do it easily and without a lot of difficulty. Add accordion flush to remove the default background color, some borders and some rounded corners to make edge to edge. I'm going to go and add that. Actually, let's just copy all that. And we'll replace it in our web page. Notice how it looks different than it did before. Some other things we can do. We can start with things always open. So I can make sure that item 1 is always open until you click on it. Oh, once you open it, okay, I see. I misspoke. Once it's open, it stays open until you explicitly close it. A list of all the possible variables that you can have associated with this. Okay, so your next assignment is to take your first assignment and put it in a Bootstrap accordion control. Also, I think your previous assignment was to take that and make a Bootstrap page for it using Bootstrap CSS. Here we're integrating Bootstrap JavaScript stuff into it. Let's use the last 10 minutes or so of class to talk about jQuery. What is jQuery? jQuery is a shortening of JavaScript syntax. In other words, in JavaScript, we do things like this. Document, get, element, by ID. All right. With jQuery, there's a much more concise way of referring to an element. Save you some typing. And I know that might sound trivial, but in a big project, it's easy to do. Also, there's a ways to use the same syntax to select things by things other than their ID. Remember, we used select by query or something like that, select by tag name. There's a bunch of document select functions available. Well, jQuery simplifies things by giving you sort of one syntax to select things. $P, for example. What does that do? Well, when you see a $parentheses, that is saying to select one or more than one element on the page. In this case, it is selecting every paragraph. And every paragraph is adding this click function to hide that particular paragraph. I could put any selector I want to in here. So the way this is written now, if I click on any paragraph, they all disappear. I could change that though. Make a class equals hideable. And do our selector of, and you'd use the same syntax that you would select CSS by hideable. And in this case, only these two are hideable. So if I click on this, it goes away. If I click on this, nothing happens. Likewise, I could do it by ID if I wanted to. And you use the query select syntax for hideable ID. So that one goes away and the others go away. Now, what's so great about this? So we saved a few characters of typing. We also allow this to work whether we're dealing with one element or multiple elements. Get the element by ID, for example, always gives us one element. There's other gets though. Get element by class that we can use. And what will that return? Well, that will return an array of elements. Well, what do we have to do then if we're writing in just plain old vanilla JavaScript? We would have to loop through that array and handle each element of the array separately. So yeah, we can do get element by class name. We can do get element by ID. We can do get element by tag. So for example, we could get every paragraph on the page. But again, our JavaScript code would have to loop through that array and do the things that we wanted to do. Get element by query selector. Query selector P. That's a way of getting, it's another way of getting all the paragraphs on the page or everything with the class and so on. This sort of makes it consistent. If we put anything in this that is a standard CSS selector, it'll figure out what it is. And if it returns one of them, it will handle it. If it returns multiple ones, it will handle it. So look how concise this would be, and think in your mind how you would do this if you wrote it in JavaScript, especially this one, the original. Would have to do document get element by tag name, give it a P. That would give us a list of all the paragraph elements on the page. We'd have to loop through them, and for each of them, do a add event and so on. Where this syntax is very simple and straightforward. It's one thing that JavaScript allows for us is to be able to select things. And that's a key thing. All these jQuery statements are going to start with a question mark. not question mark, a dollar sign. It says some of the things associated with that you can do in Bootstrap as well. For example, we can make that slide down. All right. That's very similar to the collapse function in Bootstrap. Well, why am I showing you two different things again? Well, because again, you never know what project you're going to come into. All right. You might come into a project that uses jQuery. For years, jQuery was sort of the king of this sort of thing. Right? jQuery was used, was very common and used in a lot of different applications. Is becoming less popular now, but it's still in use. Plus, there's older code that has jQuery in it. All right, so you would want to be at least somewhat familiar with it. There is sort of a subset of jQuery called jQuery UI that does things like accordion controls and all that. So we can look and see that very briefly. The jQuery UI is not really in use too much. See, here we have an accordion control. And we can look at the code. Actually, the code is a little simpler with jQuery. What advantage does Bootstrap have then? Bootstrap has the advantage of being truly responsive code. So it will allow you to create code that will look good across devices. So on a desktop machine, on a laptop, on a mobile device. One thing I will do on Google before we go. Let's look up Bootstrap menu. That's the nav bar. Let's look on the tutorial. Not sure if I showed this to you or not, but this is something that is really a good example of responsive code. When we run this, our links are horizontal on a large screen. As we get smaller at a certain point, they become stacked vertically. If you think about the difference between a mobile web page and a desktop web page, single stacked column of things is better than a nav bar that would go horizontally across the page. So that's something key to keep in mind. Another reason we study Bootstrap is Bootstrap is used in ASP.NET. So those of you taking CISS232, if you want to incorporate some of these things in your project, you're certainly more than welcome to do that. Are there any questions? I'll take that as a no. I will either see you in lab or I will see you next week. Have a good one. We'll talk to you later.